In this video, we're going to talk a little bit about data frames, which are perhaps the most important data structure in R. So data frames are two-dimensional data objects, and each column of a data frame is a vector or variable of possibly different data types. So you don't need each column to have the same data type in a data frame. However, you should know that data frames are a fundamental data structure used by most of R's modeling software. So it's really important to understand data frames if you're going to do statistics or data analysis using R. In general, when you are constructing data frames, I recommend constructing tidy data, which means that each variable should form a column of the data frame, and each observation should form a row of the data frame. So how do we construct data frames in R? So data frames are created by passing vectors into the data.frame function. And there's a few different ways of going about doing this, so we'll see some examples in what follows. So by default, the names of the columns in the data frame come from the names of the vectors you pass the data.frame function. So consider the following example here. So I have four vectors, D, E, and F. And we can see that D is a numeric vector, E is a character vector with an NA here, which is actually a special symbol we haven't talked about, or a special character we haven't talked about. And NA stands for not available. So it basically means missing data. So this is how you want to specify missing data in R. And we have another vector here, F, which is true, 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 false. So it's a logical vector. And so if we pass those three vectors to the data.frame function and assign it the name df, then when we look at df, we can see what we've created here. So you can see by default that the data frame shows the row number here. We have four different rows. We have the D column, the E column, and the F column. So by default, as you see here, the data frame names just come from the name of the vector that we passed to the data.frame function. So if after you create a data frame you decide, I don't really like those names, I'd like to change those names, then you can use the names function on your data frame and pass it a character vector which has the names of each of the columns of your data frame. And the number of values you pass here has to match the number of columns, which I've done. And so I have names, df, and I assign it the values id, or the names id, color, and past. So then if I look at df, then I see that now I have the same data frame, but the columns of my data frame have been changed to the names I specified up here. Alternatively, when you create your data frame, you can actually specify the names directly by doing something like name equals vector. So in the second example with df2, when I use the data.frame function, I'm still passing it d, e, and f, but I have this id equals, color equals, past equals. And when I do that, it automatically reads the name of each column, and it uses that name for each vector that I pass to my data frame. So once you've created a data frame, it's natural to want to access the information in that data frame. And the primary mechanism for doing that is using the $ operator and specifying the name of the desired vector. So if I want to access the color vector in df, I can do df $color, which is going to give me the second column of this data frame, which was red, white, blue, and NA. You may have noticed that a data frame looks a lot like a matrix, and so we can actually just access the rows and columns if we want to do it like that. So if I want to access the first column of my data frame, I can specify df, and then in square brackets I do 1 comma. So this 1 here means the first row. This comma divides the row and the column positions of my data frame. And if I leave the second part blank, it just means include all of the columns associated with whatever we have for the rows here. So this is going to produce the entire row 1, which in this case was 1, red, and true, which is what we have here. If I wanted to access a column, I can do something similar, but I'm going to leave the row position blank and do comma 3, which means access all the elements in column 3, which was this column right here. So we get true, 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 false, which is what we have right here. And then sometimes when you're working with data frames, it's nice to actually extract some information from your data frame and assign it a new name like new ID. So in this example right here, I've accessed the ID column of df2 and assigned it the name new ID. So we don't have a your turn example in this particular section, but if you want to, you can copy and paste these commands and make sure that you get all the same information from RStudio.